For 3 seasons, audiences knew Azula only as a villain. She was cold, precise, and terrifying. A teenager who can shoot lightning and command armies without hesitation. Then they found out she used to stand in a garden as a little girl and watch her mother hold her brother with a warmth she was never given. A child who was never held the right way becomes the most dangerous person in the Fire Nation. She buries the wound so deep, it becomes fuel. She rises on grief she was never allowed to name, and claws her way to the throne on pure weaponized loneliness. And then she falls. At that moment, something strange happened in the audience. Millions of people who had watched her burn through 3 seasons of cruelty, manipulation, and terror. People who should have been satisfied with her defeat started to recognize something in that moment that had nothing to do with fictional elemental magic. They recognized the architecture, the performance Azula put on as survival, the excellence she wore as armor, the shadow of a specific loneliness from someone who was exceptional at everything except being known. And when the villain finally broke, when the moment the audience had been waiting for 3 seasons finally arrived, they didn't feel relieved, they felt sympathy. Because the show had spent years calling her the bad guy, but when she hit the floor, the audience remembered something the story had buried just as deep as she had. She was only a 14-year-old girl. Netflix live-action Avatar, The Last Airbender Season 2 is coming out in just a few weeks. And right now, everyone is looking at the same character, Toph. Questions are circulating on how soon we will see her portrayal. How well will her performance be? Is her earthbending going to be accurate? However, I'm looking at another character.
Of course you are, man. Everyone else get to enjoy the hype like a normal person. And here Winston is, already in the corner, staring at the crazy one. Every time. Every single time.
Because I present the argument that Azula's character in this story carries more psychological weight and impact than Toph's. She has more to gain, more to lose, and more to get catastrophically wrong. Aang could have found another earthbender to teach him. However, there is no story without Azula. She is the catalyst that causes the chain reaction of what we love about The Last Airbender.
So we're not going to talk about Toph. Can we at least talk about Momo? Me like the little lemur.
No, we're not talking about Toph or Momo. Azula was introduced to us as a prodigy, a teenage firebending genius, the princess of the Fire Nation. She has blue flames and mastered lightning bending because she was never content with performing at the level everyone else had already reached. She was precise, calculated, and completely in control at all times.
Brit Merlin's mutton chops! Me was still getting wedges by Santa and his devil elves at 14. How can a little girl be taking over entire kingdoms like that?
Did you just say Santa?
Me no like to talk about it. But don't let his jolliness deceive you, man.
As an adolescent, having someone with that level of control doesn't come from just talent. Talent is raw and uneven, and sometimes embarrassing. What Azula had wasn't just talent, it was conditioning. And there's a difference between those two things that the show understood better than most people of the audience. Talent is something you're born with. Conditioning is something that's done to you. And the show gave us both versions of that distinction in the same family. Zuko is banished, scarred, and then after failing repeatedly, finds himself through those failures. Azula is celebrated, perfected, and has never failed at anything. And on the surface, that looks like one sibling's fortunate and the other one isn't. However, the unfortunate one is not Zuko in this investigation.
Wait, hold on. You saying the one who kept failing, that's actually the lucky one?
Some would call it lucky, I'd call it mercy. Because here's what nobody tells you about being the successful one. The celebrated child, the one who wins every competition, earns every approval, never gets sent away. That child is running an experiment every single day of their lives. And they don't know it yet, because the experiment has a flaw built into it from the beginning, and the flaw doesn't show up until everything is already on fire. 3,000 years before Avatar: The Last Airbender existed, the Greeks told a story about a woman named Thetis. Thetis was a sea nymph who loved her son so completely, or needed him to be great so completely, that she carried him to the river Styx as an infant and submerged him in its waters. The river was supposed to make him invulnerable, and it worked, almost entirely. The part she held him by, the heel, was the only part that stayed dry.
At least the schmuck can still die. Immortality ain't all it's cracked up to be. You close your eyes 1 second and wake up as a table ornament the next, making YouTube video.
The Greeks called this boy Achilles. They called him the greatest warrior who ever lived. His enemies feared him the way Azula's enemies feared her, not because of what he might do, but because of the absolute certainty that he would do it. Thetis didn't just raise a son, she manufactured a weapon. Now watch what Ozai does. There is a flashback early in the show. Young Azula demonstrates firebending for her father. She is precise and controlled. She performs exactly what is asked of her, and Ozai just watches. In the same moment, he turns to Zuko and finds him lacking. That scene is 12 seconds long, and it contains the entire architecture of what Azula becomes. Because what a child learns in that moment isn't how to firebend, it's that love in this household moves toward whoever is the most useful. And Azula was better at being useful than anyone around her. That should have been a good thing for her. It wasn't.
Because being the most useful one in the room isn't the same as being the most loved one in the room, man.
Exactly. One of them is love. The other is utility. Azula was useful to Ozai. Zuko was not. And somewhere in that dynamic, in that constant performance, that constant measurement, the constant implicit threat that falling short meant losing the only approval available, a teenage girl learned something that would eventually destroy her. She learned that who she was and what she could do were the same thing. That's not a character flaw, that's a design specification. And here is the part that makes it worse. There was a moment in season 3, the beach episode, where Azula is sitting around a bonfire with her brother Zuko, Mai and Ty Lee, her childhood friends. They're not at war or on a mission, just 4 people who grew up together being asked to be honest about what shaped them. Mai talks about her controlling family. Ty Lee talks about disappearing into a crowd of identical sisters. Zuko talks about his father. Then they turn to Azula. She brushes it off, at first. She says she doesn't have sob stories like the rest of them, and then something slips through. That's it.
My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
3 sentences, and the moment the third one leaves her mouth, the wall goes straight back up. Because Azula was never built to be honest. She was built to be perfect. Flawless performance, flawless image, flawless control. An idol constructed so precisely that even a single visible crack threatens the entire architecture. So she does what the architecture demands. She agrees with the wound before anyone can use it against her. She calls herself the monster first, so that nobody in that circle can turn it into a weapon. She controls the narrative of her own damage the same way she controls everything else, and then she buries it. Not because it doesn't hurt, she said it hurts. Those were the most unguarded thing Azula says in the entire series. But the image cannot afford a wound it didn't choose. So the wall comes back up. The performance resumes, and the crack gets plastered over so quickly that by the time the bonfire dies down, you can almost convince yourself it never happened. She didn't say Ozai was hard on her. She didn't say she missed her mother. Out of every wound a girl raised in the Fire Nation royal family could carry, the only one that slipped through the armor was that. She thought her own mother saw her as a monster, and she has never fully decided whether her mother was wrong. Mary Shelley understood this wound 200 years ago. In Frankenstein, the monster isn't the problem. The monster is actually the most emotionally coherent character in the entire novel. He wants to be seen. He wants to be known. He stands outside the cottage in the dark watching the family inside. Their warmth, their laughter, they're easy to love for each other. And he cannot understand why the person who created him cannot extend that same warmth to what he made. The monster eventually finds his creator and asks him directly, "Why did you make me if you were going to abandon me?" And Victor Frankenstein doesn't have an answer.
And neither does Ozai.
The show doesn't let her ask the question to Ozai. In the finale, Azula is alone, preparing for her coronation. There is no audience left to perform for her. Her own brother and friends have abandoned her. And Azula looks into a mirror and sees her mother looking back at her. It's not a memory nor a flashback. It's a hallucination. Ursa says she loves her, and Azula throws a brush at the reflection. She realizes her mother was never really there and begins to sob. The bonfire scene cracked the surface. The mirror scene shows what was underneath it the whole time. Ursa never called Azula a monster. She didn't have to. She scolded her for behavior that Ozai spent years engineering. She held Zuko with a warmth she never quite extended to his sister. She loved both her children, but one of them could feel it and the other one couldn't. And Azula, a child with no framework for understanding why her mother felt closer to her brother, arrived at her own verdict.
You think I'm a monster?
Nobody put that in her head. She built it herself from the evidence available to her. And once a child builds a belief like that about themselves, they find ways to confirm it, to own it, to weaponize it before anyone else could use it against them. That's what the bonfire confession actually is. A recitation of a conclusion she reached years ago and has been living inside ever since. And the mirror hallucination in the finale is the proof that she never stopped living inside it. The wound she built from a child's misreading of her mother's love never healed. She just got very good at performing around it. The conditioning didn't just shape her, it replaced her. And by the time the show finds her at the end, there is nothing underneath left to reach. The wound became infected and made her the most dangerous person in the Fire Nation. I too have a sister. Her name is Prudence Eves. Prudence smiles constantly. It is unclear why. Her room smells of formaldehyde and frosting, and she considers this a design choice. She conducts experiments on insects and small mammals, and uses the results for what she describes as art projects. She finds my interest in fiction and psychology to be, and I quote, boring, but in a way that's almost impressive. Prudence and I were raised in the same family, but we are not the same.
You're telling me? I've been around a long time, and there are few things in this world that scare me as much as that little brat Prudence. Did you know me woke up this morning with a snake coiled around the head? Obviously one of her stupid pranks. I'm telling you, if it weren't for your hot mother, me would have...
Did you know they watch her videos?
You're gonna edit that part out, right?
This is the thing I find most relatable with Avatar. This show understands Zuko and Azula aren't opposites. They're the same raw material processed by the same environment into completely different shapes. Same father, same absent mother, same Fire Nation rural household with a specific emotional temperature, which, ironically, is to say cold. Zuko failed visibly and repeatedly. He was banished, scarred, and humiliated in front of the entire nation. Every failure was public, documented, and used against him. And those failures, as devastating as they were, gave him something Azula never had: permission to be human. When you fail, you have to reckon with yourself. You have to sit with that gap between who you are and who you want to be. That gap, that painful, humiliating space, is actually where identity forms. It's where you find out what you actually value when performance is no longer an option. Zuko lived in that gap for 3 seasons. Azula never entered it, because Azula never failed. At least not in a way that forced her to confront the distance between her performance and her actual self, until she did. And when it happened, when the performance finally cracked, there was nothing underneath it. No self that had been quietly developing in private. No Azula behind the conditioning. Just the glue that held her idol together, coming apart. Return to the beach episode in season 3. Azula is on vacation. She's supposed to be enjoying herself, and yet she's the most lost she's ever been. Because Azula without a task to complete is not a person relaxing. She is a weapon with nothing to aim at. She tries to connect with someone on the beach. She approaches a boy, and in the interaction, if you watch it carefully, it is not awkward because she is cruel. It is awkward because she is trying. For maybe the first time in the entire series, Azula is genuinely trying to be a person.
That's a sharp outfit, Chan. Careful, you could puncture the hull of an Empire-class Fire Nation battleship, leaving thousands to drown at sea.
The philosopher Nietzsche wrote about the will to power, the drive to master, to overcome, to impose form on the chaos of existence. He meant it as something admirable, but he also understood its shadow. When the will to power becomes the entire personality, when mastery replaces meaning, what you get isn't a person, you get a function. Azula was the most effective function in the Fire Nation. And when the function broke in that final Agni Kai, flames everywhere, screaming at Zuko with tears and lightning, and everything she'd spent years compressing into perfect control, detonating all at once. The audience didn't cheer, they recognized something. What they recognized is the part of themselves that has ever tied their entire worth to their performance, their grades, their productivity, their reputation, their ability to never let anyone see them struggle. Azula isn't fascinating because she's cruel, she's fascinating because she's a mirror. And most people don't realize they're looking at their own reflection until the mirror breaks.
Iroh loved him when nobody else would, showed him what a man was supposed to be, sat with him in his worst moments, and never flinched. Azula had Ozai. Look at how them both turned out.
Here is the thing nobody says directly when they talk about Azula. She was not alone because no one was there. She was alone because she had been so thoroughly conditioned to weaponize every relationship, to convert every human connection into leverage, that genuine closeness became structurally impossible for her. Ty Lee performed happiness around Azula because the alternative was genuinely frightening. Mai stayed close because the relationship gave her structure and a life that otherwise bored her into numbness. Neither of them chose Azula. They orbited her the same way smaller objects orbit something with gravitational pull. And that's not friendship. That's just proximity enforced by fear.
But Winston, don't they end up abandoning her at the end anyways? It's hard to find good help these days.
I'm sure Azula knew that would happen at some point, just not in the most pivotal point of the war. On some level, underneath all the performance, she knew that no one in her immediate circle was there by genuine choice, and that knowledge, which she can never acknowledge directly, sat in her like poison. And here is the contradiction that audience feels before they can name it. The same qualities that made Azula powerful, the precision, the control, the ability to read a room and use what she found in there, were the exact qualities that made genuine connection impossible. Her greatest strength was her Achilles heel, operating on full display. She wasn't lonely despite being exceptional. She was lonely because of it.
Unbelievable. And here's where it stopped being just about Azula, doesn't it? Because how many people watching this right now have a whole circle of people around them, and the moment that environment disappears, them gone too.
This is where Light Yagami becomes relevant.
Link is on screen.
In Death Note, Light constructs a perfect performance of brilliance and moral superiority, so complete that it eventually consumes him entirely. He stops being a person, playing a role, and becomes the role itself, the genius, the god, the one whose judgment cannot be questioned. He has followers, he has fear, he has power, but he has no one who actually knows him. And in the moments when the performance slips, when Ryuk laughs at him, when L gets close to the truth, what you see on Light's face isn't anger. It's a specific panic of someone who has never learned to exist without an audience. Azula's breakdown wasn't caused by losing the throne. Losing the throne was the mechanism. The actual cause was something simpler and more devastating. She had no one to call when she needed.
Jesus Christ, Winston. You're somehow making me feel bad for the villain. Loneliness like that would crush anyone.
The Greeks had a word for what Azula performed. Aret. It translated to excellence, virtue through mastery. It refers to the realization of one's full potential, fulfilling your inherent purpose, and being the best version of yourself in any given moment. They also understood that Aret without connection produces not a hero. It produces Achilles, alone in his tent, refusing to fight, because the one thing that got through the armor was being taken away. And an Achilles who won't fight isn't just a weapon anymore, he's just a person. Azula never got to be just a person, but perhaps she will come close to being one. After the Agni Kai, Zuko didn't put Azula in a cell. He put her in a facility. That single decision tells you everything about what Zuko understood that Ozai never did. His sister wasn't a threat to be contained. She was a casualty to be treated. A year later, she was still in a straitjacket, still wearing the same expression she had at the end of the fight. The facility hadn't given her a self to rebuild because the self had never been constructed in the first place. You cannot rehabilitate something that was never habilitated.
Well, maybe a little electroshock therapy might do the trick, no?
In the comics, she escaped. She manipulated and convinced Zuko to take her along to find their mother, knowing it was the one thing he couldn't refuse. And when they find Ursa, and the apology finally comes, Azula runs, and she doesn't stop running. She comes back with new plans, new schemes, and leads a shadow organization. She plots political chaos engineered around her brother's throne. And here is what the comics eventually revealed about all of it. None of it was about reclaiming power for herself. It was just about Zuko. She couldn't be his sister. She had no language for that. So she did what the conditioning had always equipped her to do. She built a war and ran it from the shadows. She pushed him to his limits, tested his leadership, forced him to become better. Because manipulation wasn't the only form of love Ozai ever taught her was real. Then came the Spirit Temple. She finds herself alone once again, her followers gone, and she stumbles into a mysterious forest temple and was forced to confront everything she had spent her entire life performing around. Her father's toxic approval, her mother's loving judgment, every person she had pushed away, and the spirit inside that temple tells her she's at a crossroads. And here's what makes that moment worth paying attention to, because in season 2 of the show, At the Crossroads of Destiny, Zuko faces the exact same choice. At the time, he chose the wrong path, and then he spends the rest of the series finding his way back from it. The Spirit Temple places Azula at the same crossroads deliberately, and she falls back into old patterns, with the door closing behind her.
Sigh. Welp, me suppose this is one case file we won't be closing anytime soon.
Her whereabouts after the Spirit Temple are currently unknown. The legend of Korra accounts for almost every major character from the original series, but it never mentions Azula. Here's what I keep coming back to when I look at the full arc of this character. Zuko carries his damage, where you can see it, a scar on his face, the mark of someone who was broken and had to rebuild in public. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, the craftsman doesn't hide the cracks, nor does he discard the broken pieces. They repair it with gold. The cracks become the most beautiful part of the object. The history of the breaking becomes what makes it worth keeping. Visible, golden, and permanent. Zuko and Azula are both kintsugi. One of them has already been repaired. His cracks are golden and visible, and the world got to watch it happen in real time. The other one is still on the floor. But here's the thing about kintsugi that most people miss. The craftsman never discards the broken pieces. No matter how long they sit shattered, no matter how many times a vessel cracks in the same place, the gold is always waiting. The story has spent years keeping Azula's file open. Every comic, every crossroads, every moment she almost chose differently and didn't. None of it reads like a closed door. It reads like a story that isn't finished yet. And somewhere out there, in a canon that hasn't been written yet, in a film that hasn't been made yet, and whatever comes next for this world, there is a version of Azula that finally lets someone hold the pieces long enough to pour the gold in. We haven't seen it yet, but the craftsman hasn't given up, and neither has the audience. So this file will stay open. Here's what the investigation action uncovered. Underneath the fire, underneath the precision and the control and the absolute certainty she wore like armor, there was a girl who wanted her father to look at her and see her, not as the weapon or instrument or prodigy, her. And he never did. So she found a substitute. If she could not be loved, she would be feared. And fear became the only affirmation the architecture allowed her. When people shrank in her presence, that wasn't cruelty. That was a wounded child asking the only question she had left. Am I worth something? And the room answered every time. Now here is the part that matters. The people who love Azula the most, who watched her break down on the arena floor and felt grief instead of satisfaction, they didn't recognize the power. They recognized the exhaustion underneath it. The specific cost of performing strength for people that don't know they're watching a performance. Azula was brilliant and devastating and completely unreachable, and she ran when love finally arrived without conditions, because by then, the conditioning was too deep to receive it. That's not weakness. That's the most human thing she ever did.
Winston, Would you rather be loved by everyone or feared by everyone, man? Which one actually better?
Azula spent her whole life answering that question, and she still ended up alone in the dark. For now, this investigation will stay open. Maybe because some wounds don't resolve on a narrative schedule, and maybe because someone watching this is still trying to find that out themselves.
Next time, I am picking the character. No more dark side cycles. We are gonna cover fun flying lemurs or SpongeBob or something.